Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Andrea. If you are an English listener, this is probably the first and last time that you will listen to this podcast. Originally, this podcast is an Italian personal finance podcast, but I had the opportunity to interview Jacob from ERE, Jacob L Fisker. Probably everybody who's listening to this knows him. The idea today is to make kind of like for a different interview. I'm not going to ask him for the fifth time how he lives on 7,000 US dollars a year. Instead, we're going to try and make it a little bit about the unknown Jacob. So go a little bit into what he does in his life and try not to touch on the same points that he's touched already in some of his other interviews. There's been some excellent ones on radical personal finance and other podcasts even recently. So without further ado, Jacob, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll try to be a Dane-speaking American then.
Listen, I hope the listeners excuse my thick accent. You know, we're two foreigners trying to juggle with English. I hope we do well enough. If you want, you can grade us in the comments. Jacob, one of the first things that struck me is I remember, you were talking. You often talk about sports, even in your excellent book. You mentioned that you've always been a sporty guy. So I'm guessing you started from a young age. You want to tell us a little bit about what your experience was with sports?
Yeah, I've done a lot of different things. I've done swimming, which was my mainstay. I've done table tennis. My mother was almost a national team handballer, and she tried to get me playing handball, and that lasted about 10 minutes. I don't think I left the bench. What else? I've done sword fighting. I've done sailing. I've done inline hockey. So a little bit of everything. I've also had a few periods in my life where I've been completely inactive, but I find that I don't feel too well after a couple of years of that. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sword fighting sounds very Renaissance man, actually.
Yeah.
I kind of like this. Just one question to go a little bit deeper. So I've been playing sports when I was younger as well. I used to play water polo. There seems to be a difference at times in how people think about what is playing sports. So I usually draw a completely arbitrary line at the 10-hour per week of training. Above that is sports, and it's usually above that level, normal people will consider you kind of like superhuman on what you do.
Right.
So which of those sports did you do at the 10+ hour mark?
Okay, I was just under that with the swimming, but the rest was like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours for the sword fighting, I think. I also forgot karate. I don't think sailing counts as like multiple hours, even though you're out for like 5 hours at a time. It's a little different in that sense.
How physically intensive is sailing the way you did it? I mean, there's two ways I picture sailing. One is the very big guys scrambling and
Right.
huffing and puffing, and then
Right.
there's the smooth like retired guy sailing into the sunset. So I
Right.
guess you're doing the former.
Yeah, it was regatta amateur stuff. It was a 10.5 meter. I suppose I need to keep everything in metric. Is probably the better idea here. So it was a.
Use
Yeah,
both. We're trying to make everything as complicated as possible.
Yeah, it was a J105, which is a one type boat, so 10.5 meters long essentially, and it can be single handled, but usually there's like 4 to 6 on the crew. And the physicality of it really depends on what kind of position you have. I mean, I think if you're the tactician, you sort of like just sit there and drink coffee or something, as far as I understand. And of course, if you have like my position, which was the mainsail trimmer, you're probably the hardest working guy on the boat, like in my humble opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, obviously you're, let's say, famous for the work you've done on the ERE front. But do you think there's something that translates, let's say, from playing sports on a very competitive and high energy kind of way at a young age. Do you think there's something that translates into your future self?
Yeah, I'm not really super sure about that. I think from the ERE thing, I think the better sort of one-to-one correspondence between me and the whole retirement thing is I've done so many different things. I don't seem to be able to stay at the same thing for more than a few years before I lose interest. That seems to be like a recurring theme. I remember with the swimming, which is for sure the thing I've spent the most time on. I did that from between I was 6, I believe, to I was 14. So ending up spending about 90 minutes in the water six times a week. And my parents were always sort of the you got to finish what you started, you can't give up here. So I did that. But I think that was kind of incorporated into my personality, so that I ultimately burned out completely on the swimming. So I have literally not been in a pool for over 20 years now. It's like I don't miss that at all.
Ooh, okay.
And I think with the career stuff, it was kind of like my physics career was kind of the same thing. As soon as I stopped, I didn't really think much about it anymore. So I have tended to go a little bit too far with things.
And so you kind of burn out?
I would say so. I mean, if you're like super committed to something, you tend to be burning the candle from both ends at the same time. And so that tends to be how I approach things.
Okay.
And then it just doesn't last as long.
No, on my side, the impression that I had playing sports at a young age, you learn a couple of skills that I think might be translatable, let's say, to a future self. One is the team side. If you play a team sport, okay, and I think definitely that will probably help more in a kind of like traditional career.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
But then there's this ability to suffer. I call it the ability to suffer.
Right.
That makes everything easier, like tightening the belt a little bit. I remember you have a very simple description of how you approached in the past cutting costs, meaning I would just cut until it hurt and then release a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think that might be some part. How much, let's say, suffering did you experience in playing sports?
I don't think I thought of it as suffering per se. I mean, that was not what I was focusing on. I would say. I mean, of course, you go through pain, like with lactic acid, stuff like that. And with swimming, there's absolutely zero team sports, even like in a relay. There's very little team in it. I mean, it's like a relay, right? Mm-hmm. And it's even more boring than like running on a treadmill, because you're just staring at the bottom, going back and forth and back and forth. So in that regard, I don't know. So I do remember we were always told that swimmers usually go on to become big things. I mean, maybe it's more of a persistence or frustration tolerance with that particular sport. I mean, it's kind of like you mentioned, like with water polo, right? There's like a team sports aspect to it. Mm-hmm. And that is not the case for swimming at all. And the first team sport I actually did was hockey. Inline hockey, and I really enjoyed that. You're no longer just like playing for yourself. You're trying to make the other players look good as well, and you're trying to coordinate much. It becomes much bigger. But
what kind of player were you? Were you like more of a playmaker, or it's...
Yeah, okay. so technically in inline hockey, I think, I mean, you have four players and a goalie. And there's technically no fixed position, but the kind of player I was more sort of like center/power forward, because I wasn't particularly fast. I was kind of heavy relative to the other guys, and heavy. But I mean, I only weighed like 180 pounds, but that's like 80 kilograms, mm-hmm. and pretty strong for that as well. So I've generally been winning all the face-offs, and I could move people around in front of the net. So I was doing face-offs, and I was for some strange reason, I'm good at passing. Like I kind of know where they want to go, and I can put the puck in front of them. But I'm not good at like dekeying and dangling and like maneuvering the puck in clever ways and stuff like that. So the kind of goals I would be scoring would be garbage goals, which is kind of like the hockey equivalent of a basketball rebound. So you're under the basket, the ball comes back, and then you can put it in.
For some reason, I'm not surprised that you were good at passing and seeing what other people do. One of the things I've always admired about you is this kind of like a supernatural ability to see the bigger picture, and I think it's something that translates from one field to the other. Are you doing something now in terms of sports, or are you just keeping active on your own? You have more free time compared to the average Joe. So what are you doing in this regard?
Well, I mean, I kind of think of it as having sporting phases in my life. So I did a lot of it when I was a kid, and then when I was at the university and in grad school, I did practically nothing. I ran 5K each day when I was at the university. But in grad school, I did absolutely nothing. And then when I got to the US and started my first postdoc, I tried to run 5K again, and I had like the worst case of tendonitis I've ever. I mean, I couldn't walk for a week, and that kind of made me realize it's like you either gotta use it or you gotta lose it, especially as you're getting older and older, right? Because I mean, it used to be when I was like 15 or something, and I'd been slacking off, then you could go back to being pretty much as good as you were within like 2 weeks or something. You would be running full speed again. But now we're talking like months. I mean, What I'm doing is essentially I'm working out in front of the TV since we moved to Chicago.
What does it mean? How do you work out in front of the TV?
Yeah, so I'm doing aerobics of the more hardcore variety. I used to be like super dismissive of it, but then I found that they kind of stepped up the game. There's this Beachbody thing, it's called here, a company that does these more high intensity type workouts. So that's essentially what I'm doing now, just keeping in shape for almost no reason at all. I mean, it's not being used for anything other than to look good.
But I guess it has some pretty good health repercussions in the future, hopefully.
I mean, that's my main point. I mean, the other thing I sort of noticed was that for old athletes, a lot of us end up with like sports injuries, which can become almost permanent or chronic. So that's something I wanted to avoid. So I'm not really playing hockey anymore because I don't want to wreck my knees or an ankle or something and then have to like suffer that for the next 30 years. So in that sense, I've kind of sacrificed it. I'd rather be doing something like sailing again, where, I mean, the worst thing that can happen in sailing is that you drown or you get like brained by the boom coming over and hitting you on the head. But that's kind of like a terminal failure. It's not a chronic injury. It's a terminal injury.
The drowning seems like a suboptimal scenario, honestly. but they're definitely softer on the body. Probably. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with like cycling. I'm not going to do that either. I did a little bit of that, just sort of as exercise, and when we lived in California. So that's like great for cycling. But I had some incidences where I was probably a little more too stupid brave, going downhill like 45 miles an hour. That's like I believe 70 kilometers an hour, which to me is pretty damn fast. and you just gotta realize if you hit a pothole or something, or you go over the cliff or something, then you can break something serious, right? So I don't want to do that either.
So I visited your home country a few times, and while everybody in Europe has this impression that the Dutch are basically those who are always cycling everywhere, I noticed that in Denmark it's probably even worse or better depending on the point of view. Is it something that you brought to the US? Like, did you bring your bike? Was it like your actual normal mean of transportation, or did you have to adapt to the fact that American cities are not exactly designed to favor biking?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fun story. So, like, one of the first thing I was asked when I arrived at my first postdoc, and that was in Indiana at the University of Notre Dame, was whether I liked to bike, and I was like, I didn't quite understand the question. And no, I like. You mean like for fun? No, I don't ride bikes for fun. I just do it to get around, right? that was completely my attitude there. So it took me like I think a year or two before I bought this kind of crappy $35 bike. I was still sort of very, very frugal at that point. Let everything cost as little as possible. And my point was that if I didn't need it anymore, I could just sort of leave it unlocked on campus and let it get stolen, which is actually also how I got rid of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was gone like in 24 hours. But then when I moved to California, it's kind of like from Europe. There's like this perspective that the U.S. is one big uniform country. But it's like really like a bunch of states which are like so as different from each other almost as individual European countries. So California was like a completely different country, and the things that people usually pick, you pick something there. So if you're rich, you go to Lake Tahoe and ski or something like that. And I'm not willing to spend that amount of money. So then you got sailing, you got hockey, and you got cycling, and you got drinking wine. So you pick some of those. So and I did the first three.
Okay, so
pretty much.
Wine didn't qualify as a sport.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is quite. I think wine tasting is pretty competitive in that area. I mean, in the city I lived, I had something like 50 something vineyards. Just there. So people do these kind of where you get on a bike and then you do wine tasting, and then you have a sip, and then you ride on to the next one and just continue until I guess you can't continue anymore. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, my boss lent me his road bike. So, and that was the first time ever I had a road bike, and going fast was like, wow, I got to get my own. So this is going to be like my reward for moving to California.
So yeah, going back to what you were saying, yeah, there's I've lived in the U.S. as well. I spent a few years in New York, and traveling around for work. And there's the image that a lot of people have in Europe is this, as you were saying, the U.S. being this sort of like uniform kind of country. There's nothing further from the truth. Like you can go to New Orleans, and then to San Francisco, and then to Texas, and then to New York, and it's like, it's a completely different words. I mean, there's a common thread, of course, but it's very, very different. So circling back, again, I'm Italian, so we're kind of obliged by contract to talk about food and kitchen. So one of the things that kind of stuck with your image is the very famous fact that you were cooking a large amount of lentil soup. This kind of comes to a surprise to Americans, but for Italians who eat pasta pretty much every day since the age of 4 till the age of when they die, basically eating the same thing every day per se is not something bad. Now, what's the primary reason you started cooking? I mean, was it to save money? Was it because you enjoyed it? Was it to...
So, I mean, the Danish cuisine is not really well renowned for anything whatsoever. I mean, with very few exceptions. So I grew up eating meat and potatoes. So every night at dinner it was some slab of meat, minced meat fried up in a burger or something, and then like 4 to 6 potatoes. Like, you gotta eat your potatoes or you won't get any dessert. And then a vegetable, which was usually some kind of overboiled bean or whatever, or a carrot salad. And so food was not something I enjoyed. I just had to eat it. I was also like very allergic as a kid, so there was some limit to what I could eat of fun stuff, but it didn't really limit dinner. So I've been reading some books when I was like 16 or 17 about vegetarianism, and that sounded kind of like the healthy thing to do. So it was more of a health thing than an ethical thing. And then when I moved away from home, so maybe to explain the Danish educational system, once you go to like to the university, so like most people will eventually move away from their parents within like the first year, or like as soon as possible. So I think that's different in Southern Europe. That is about correct, right?
So, tell you a funny story. When I was doing my Erasmus exchange program in France, there was this movie that came out about this guy called Tanguy, and it was like a kind of like funny movie. It was supposed to be a comical movie, and the headline said he's 30 years old, he still lives with his parents. And when me and the other fellow Italians looked at it, we're like, so what's wrong with that?
We had exact same argument going on in grad school in Switzerland. So there was like a lot of overlap between like the Northern Europeans and the Southern Europeans. And it was always about like mom and spaghetti. You can't leave until you're married or something, right?
Yeah, that turns out some stereotypes are 90% true. So,
right.
Yeah, definitely. So,
yeah.
So
like with the dorm system, so they're like different dorms. So it's not like the US dorm system where they're all on campus. They're generally spread around the city. And they're like different types. You can get like a studio apartment if you want to spend everything you make on rent, or you can get what I had, which was like about 4 rooms to a shared kitchen, or you can do sort of the 10 or 15 rooms to a shared kitchen. But I had like the former, for sort of like the shared with 4 other people. Mm-hmm. And that essentially means that I had to learn how to cook for myself. And what we did have in like, I think it was between grades 5 and 7 or thereabouts, there was like home economics or cooking classes in school. So at least I knew how to follow a recipe. But I mean, as I mentioned, I had sort of like dabbled with the idea of becoming vegetarian, and I do remember being somewhat of a tightwad at the time. So now suddenly I was paying for food with my own money. And it was kind of clear that milk and meat and those kind of things were both something I had to like ride out on my bike and get much more often, because they wouldn't last as long and they were more expensive. So pretty much every day throughout my undergraduate, I spent like maybe 45 minutes, half an hour to an hour, but typically 45 minutes cooking and talking to some of the other people in our quadrant there, while learning how to combine different recipes. In the beginning, I had huge books of recipes I was reading through, but then I started figuring out sort of how cooking worked, and then it became more freehand. And so to this day, I can probably walk into most kitchens. If they're vegetables, I can make something that's probably not bad, pretty good out of vegetables. But I had no idea how to cook meat other than hot dogs, which is a kind of vegetables, as we all know.
It's funny how it again, the parallels that I see, and again, Italians bring everything back to food, so it's kind of normal that they do this. But once you get skilled, I like your you have the C, and then I lose count of the number of C's, and cooking is really 100% like that. Where at a certain point you kind of like you open the fridge. You connect ingredients together and you just make stuff up on the fly.
Exactly.
Is it still what's the is it changed today? Do you cook with a different attitude? Do you plan your meals, or still no? No,
it's I'm married now, and my wife has sort of like a different strategy for it. But I've not gone back to this. Like let's look at a recipe and then figure out the missing ingredients and make a plan and buy this stuff, and then we cook this for like the next week. I've never gotten into that. I know many people start like that. I mean, it's sort of like the next evolution in the CCC chain from the first one, where you just go into a supermarket and just start, buying random shit, right? Which is how many people do it. But I mean, the funny thing, I mean, with the like over here, a lot people eat a lot more processed food or convenience food, and so when I like visit in-laws or family and I have to cook, I end up cooking. I look in the fridge and it's like I see nothing I can use here, right?
Yeah.
Like, is this food? How do I go with this? There are no vegetables. There's just like a bunch of colorful like packages and shrink wrap stuff. So I mean, most stuff is meant to be heated up. So in that, but I mean, it's possible to like cook regularly. So that's what we do here. We do most stuff from staples, except ketchup.
Yeah, we kind of do the same in our household. Not that anybody cares, but yeah, we're the kind of people that will go more or less every day to the supermarket, and we buy primarily, which I understand is what you guys do as well. Basically whole foods, not meaning the expensive supermarket chain in the US, but just basic ingredients. And once what I have found out, I've worked as a cook when I was younger, so I'm fairly experienced, let's say, as a cook, is that the more you advance, the less you want to use those kind of like processed foods. And it has two gigantic advantages, in my opinion, is that basically you manage to eat better quality stuff by spending less. Because when you go into a supermarket, it's what's your strategy for buying when you go in a supermarket? You kind of touched on this in different interviews, but like walk me through the 1, 2, 3 steps of Jacob with his backpack going in the supermarket and figuring out what he's going to eat the same day.
Yeah, so we don't do that anymore. So like the first thing is, so my wife does practically all the shopping here, but we don't go daily. I used to do it when I lived in Switzerland, or not daily, but like often, like maybe 2 or 4 times a week, because it was like right on the way. But now, I mean, especially with COVID, we go shopping something like every 4th to 6th week now. So we have a lot of storage of staples like beans and rice and pasta. And then we have a freezer, which is generally also completely full. And then we have the garden, which is getting even more expanded this year. And so that's essentially we have. And so when we run short on something, we just stock that up. So our kitchen looks more like a mini mart of various things. There's like a line with oatmeal, and there are buckets with like red beans, black beans, pinto beans. So anything we want to cook, we can sort of make it out of that, sort of like the basics.
So you've basically internalized because the only reason why we go often to the supermarkets is to buy fresh groceries, like the veggies and stuff like that. But you're in the garden, so you basically
we just go out
internalize that. You're integrated there.
Yeah.
I see.
Insourced it.
You insourced, exactly. That's the right word. How did it start, and how was it evolving? The garden thing, I guess. It's definitely an evolving process. It's not something like whenever people talk about resilience, you got to buy some seeds and grow a tomato plant or something, and then you're good. But I found there's way more to it. You kind of have to become familiar with your area, the soil, where the sun falls, where the stuff grows best, which kind of animals come in and eat your vegetables, and when they do it, and how to fence them off, that kind of stuff. So we've been sort of arranging it every other year to try some new stuff, and slowly sort of build up our production. It might be one of those where it would have been better to almost hire an expert and come in and say, do this and that.
Because like I said, like a lot of garden advice is extremely local in nature. Whereas if you read a book or something, it might be written for another country or for another bioregion, or the soil might be different. But I mean, that's kind of like trivial in retrospect, but it's not really obvious when the main messaging is like, well, you just got to start growing a potato plant, like a tomato plant. So it's been a learning process.
How much of your food do you get out of the garden?
Like last year, for the first year I counted and weighed everything, and we only have a loss rate of something like 1 or 2% tops, and we got 338 pounds over the year. But calorie wise, I forget what it was. I think I calculated it'll feed like one person for a month, right? Because vegetables are not really calorie dense. So the idea of being self-sufficient is crazy. I mean, the level is so high if you actually want to go there. So we just kind of see it as an aid, or like an addition to the general meal, the general eating. I mean, it's super convenient just to be able to go out back and then harvest. Yeah, I need some tomatoes. Okay, they're over there, and I need some cilantro. It's there, and then some lettuce from over there, right? And it takes like 5 minutes.
No, and then I'm guessing what you're planning to do is try to minimize the reliance on the outside system, right?
Yeah.
Calories per se are cheap, and easy to store for a long time. So means, for example, your pasta, your rice, whatever. What's harder to come by is the veggies, the fibers, the vitamins, and that sort of stuff. So I guess it makes a ton of sense integrating that. Have you thought about adding chickens, which seems to be like the first step of people who want to integrate like protein in the with the eggs and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, my wife would really like to have some, but it's against the ordinance, zoning. We live too close to the city, so it's a no-go. I mean, I know there are people around here that might may or may not have some, but yeah, we don't.
So when I lived in New York, we had a couple of friends who was raising chickens on their balcony. So I guess
exactly. No, it's funny. It's actually legal in Chicago, but it's not legal in the suburbs.
Crazy. Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. I
mean. Yeah. Jacob, pivoting to another topic that interests me a lot. So you're a Danish person living in the US. You were mentioning Switzerland before. So I'm a little bit of a word citizen as well, having lived in different countries. Do you want to give us first like a little bit of, let's say, just intro history of where you've lived and how, and then, I would like to move into what challenges you faced as a foreigner. Where do you think, you had an advantage? So feel free to go on.
Yeah, I mean, I was born and raised in Denmark, and we never really moved around much as a kid. My parents still live within like probably 10 kilometers of where they were born, as far as I know. Yeah, about 10 kilometers, maybe even 5. And I also went to the university about 20 kilometers from where I lived, so did not go to Copenhagen. But then when I went to grad school, I went first to Switzerland, and my idea was simply it's serendipity. So you just got to jump on it. And being in astrophysics, which is like a highly specialized field, there's only so many places in the world you can work in. It's a little bit like working for a transnational company. And so when I graduated from that, I could essentially choose between Germany and the US. Those were the 2 offers I have. And I knew that the only other places where I could ever work would be Japan, Canada, and another place in the US. So essentially I picked the US one. Then I moved over there. Worked a postdoc. So in physics, you generally do not start you don't get tenure, you don't get a solid career until you're close to 40. So in generally they want two postdocs, that last 2 to 3 years each. And you're supposed to be very flexible and move around from country to country under the sort of like the way they sort of excuses this that you're learning, but I think they're really looking for cheap labor and sort of like for people who build connections all around the world. So I moved. So I lived for 3 years in Indiana, where I met my wife, and then that postdoc ran out, and I got another offer in California, and she followed me there. Actually, I got an offer in Canada as well, but we decided, since I had applied for permanent residency in the US at that point, and that was sort of like in progress, I had to decline the Canadian one. So we ended up in California, and after a few years of that, I got tired of physics, and kind of stayed that for a while until I got another offer in Chicago to come and work in finance. So we moved over here, and we've sort of been staying here ever since.
What made you pick the US between the different options?
So it was just a question of the group, essentially. Like where did I see the bigger career prospects? It was not really a country specific choice. I mean, I knew that the German group were just the guy running that was about to retire. So I picked the US one.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges did you face? Like the US is a pretty welcoming country, all in all. It's very easy I found to settle in, but did you have any particular challenge? What would you recommend to somebody moving to a different continent from Denmark today?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the biggest challenge was the Swiss one. I mean, mainly learning the language, especially as a highly introverted person, because I don't generally seek out people to talk with or hang out with a lot. I just work and think and read and write. So I mean, I can read and understand Swiss German, I would say, but I can't really speak it to any degree. And I think if you don't really speak the language of the country you're living in, you're at a really severe disadvantage. So I would go for the language, unless there are obviously solutions to that, but I mean that's been sort of my limit in terms of where I'm willing to go, especially as I get older and older. I mean, I've just not. How do I say that? The idea of learning another language now in order to go live in a completely different country is not appealing to me. But other people enjoy it, right? So
I guess it's a declining interest. When you're younger, it's
also like a declining ability, just brain wise. I like being fluent in the language. I mean, I think especially maybe as a Dane, having an obvious or less obvious accent is something that bothers me tremendously for some strange reason. Americans seem to find that it's somehow cute or interesting, but I'm really trying hard to eliminate it. It's something about where do you fit in, that kind of thing. So Danes really pigeonhole you by what accent you have. Oh, he lives in that city, or she lives in that city. So okay. and
any specific advantage on the other hand? Did you think on some aspects did you feel like you had the upper hand on some locals, some obvious advantage?
Yeah, I'm like a foot taller than most of the natives, so I can beat them up. Nah. Yeah, no. No, I think the main that's the Viking advantage.
Yeah.
So when the Danes go and become tourists, Anyway, so I think the advantage is mainly when you bring one culture into another culture, and you have to find some way of combining them. That often leads to interesting and maybe novel and maybe positive solutions. I think if you look at like the earlier the progenitors, the early leaders or the old gangsters of the fire movement. I mean, something like, I don't know if it's the majority, but it's around half at least are actually immigrants in the U.S. And you see the same thing like in Silicon Valley, the CEOs, more than half of them are immigrants or born to immigrants. So that kind of crossover, creates some like cross pollination or some opportunities for filling new niche kind of areas that wasn't filled already. So I think that's the primary advantage. But I think also that requires that you're able to sort of like go out and interact with the existing culture. And for me, that required the language, which is why I don't think much happened in Switzerland while I was there. I mean, I was just there to work. So,
but probably there's the US is a little bit more used to welcoming people than Switzerland.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell. I don't really have any A/B testing. I mean, I don't think I mean, for instance, the Danes are often accused of being sort of like distant. So like when you're not in, you're not really in, but when you're in, you're really in. So you have to cross this kind of moat or barrier to actually, become friends with someone. There's less of a barrier in the US, that's for sure.
Another thing that, the difference, so what you were saying before, so I think number one, there might be a little bit of survivorship bias, because when I asked you the question of which challenges, you really didn't come up with any challenge that you faced as a foreigner. And that I think speaks more about the mindset that you have rather than, the actual situation, because some other people, when moving to a different town in the same country, would see challenges, right? So probably a lot of people who move across the globe are kind of like wired in a way that they adapt
probably
faster, right?
Yeah.
And that brings me to one of the dualisms that I really like and enjoy, that you often mention, the difference between being a tourist or being an expat. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to enjoy the fact, I know the word, I've spent a couple of days in so and so, right?
Right.
Which is, I think there's, I don't know. Give me your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly made some snide comments towards the tourism angle on my blog in the past, and I think if I could pick between like visiting like 100 countries for 3 days each, and then just visiting one country for a full year, I'd pick the latter, because I think like the quick stays, you're really only seeing like the surface of the country. You get kind of like the consumer dimension of it. You see the sights, and you see a few restaurants, and you buy some souvenirs. So it's very much on the surface. You interact with people selling things to tourists, right? Whereas if you live there and you work there and pay taxes, you get colleagues, you begin to understand how the culture works, how the political system works, how in particular, like how are these people different from me and how are they similar? And I think one can learn a lot more from that than just as a visitor. So that's my preference. So that obviously, I mean, and then there's of course like the difference between like I don't know whether like an expat is considered permanent or temporary. That's the other thing, I think.
I guess it depends, right, on the person.
Right.
Sometimes you have a couple of year stints, and basically people will see themselves as a long-term tourist and still live completely outside of the situation. I imagine if somebody like me or you would move to, say, Japan or Taiwan, countries with a radically different language and very, very, I would say, patriotic. probably you would live as an expat if you only had a 2-year stint, right? Not really 100% integrating, and whereas with the US, it's probably easier. The language barrier
Yeah, and
is lower.
I think it's also a question of how committed one is to the area per se. I mean, I have permanent residency in the US, and I'm most likely gonna stay here, right? It's different from having like a 1 year, 3 year contract somewhere and then going back. I mean, but again, it kind of comes down to the attitude. I mean, there's like for example, there's like retirement communities all around the world almost, right? So when you go there, you have to sort of like decide, do I move in, like with similar Danes from, in that Danish colony there, right, in Spain, for example, or do I actually go live where I can be more interactive with the locals? So I mean, it's kind of like you kind of get out of it what you bring in many ways.
True.
Yeah.
One passion that we seem to have in common is watches. I mean, I probably spent significantly more than you because I'm less advanced. I remember you were mentioning in your book, like you actually started dabbling into watch repair and that sort of stuff. How did it all start? I mean, where does your passion from watches come from?
I think it started with consumerism, actually. So I mean, I used to be a gadget freak, spending all my money on buying new stuff, and at some point the turn had come to watches. And so I started researching about, as I usually did, about fancy watches and Rolex and Omega and so on and so forth. But having no money as a student, I just bought some cheap rip-off from, I think, Q&Q or something. I still have it, actually. So yeah, my watch collection is worth way less than yours, I think. But I still have an embarrassingly large number of them.
Is it something that you still use?
Yeah, I'm still but it's sort of like it's like putting on your pants or something. I put on a watch in the morning, even though I mean there's clocks everywhere. I don't know. I don't think I've been without a watch for much in my life.
And do you repair them yourself, or is it something that you resorted to outsourcing in the end?
It's probably rather that they break and they're so cheap that I don't want to bother repairing them, so they're just sitting there. I'll admit as once. So like at one point I wanted to get into watchmaking, which really is watch repairing, perhaps like as a second or third or fourth career. So I got the tools and I managed to take like a mechanical movement completely apart and put it together again, assembling it. And then I realized that as a career, most watchmakers are really not making or repairing as much as they're just changing batteries in people's watches. And so there's not really much of a career to be had. I mean, it's sort of come up again a little bit, like with these kind of designer watches or mods. I think have become much more popular than they were when I was dabbling in it. But personally, I've actually returned sort of to my digital roots. So I'm currently wearing a cheap Casio.
Okay, so with me, I couldn't wear a Rolex for an interview with Jacob, so I had to wear a cheaper watch. Now, if you, let's say you were transported to a different planet where you're no longer Jacob, but you are a less spendthrift person. And money were no object, which watch would you buy today?
Well, I mean, technically money is no object, but I wouldn't buy an expensive one because I'm probably like too afraid of like scratching it or something. Mm-hmm. So I've been kind of going back and forth on that, right? Should you buy like a nice one and then constantly have to worry about what you do with it? Or would it be better to get like a $10 one, and if it breaks, you just get another one? I mean, I know it's kind of like environmentally wasteful, right? But if you can think of your watch as something that does that, you don't have to worry about it at all, right? So if there was a question that came up on the forum like probably years ago, and I thought about it, and during a moment of COVID boredom, I actually bought both the watches that were discussed, and one of them were the F91W, I think, which is like the $10 Casio watch that became popular in the 90s.
Yes.
So you know that one? It's like ubiquitous. And I got it in a fully grayed out version. So the band is kind of shit, so I'm thinking of replacing that. And then the other one I got was the old G-Shock, like the one that's like approved for space travel.
I see.
So, yeah, that's like the 5600 DW 5600 or something.
Yes.
Yeah. So those two, but I can't really decide which one I like the more, because I think
the funny story. The $10 one, I actually took it diving, and I took it down to 40 meters when it's only rated for 30. And it kind of lasted, and it's still working strong. So it's really impressive. I don't
even think it's rated for diving. I think it's just water resistant.
Yeah.
But I've seen people like swim around with it all the time, no problem. I mean,
$10 is not exactly a huge.
It's amazing. It's amazing what you get for that price, right?
No, it's from a purely financial standpoint. Actually, wearing and owning nice watches, if you're willing to buy secondhand, is, aside from the initial investment, is not really a very expensive endeavor.
Right.
Watches tend to lose a lot of value, kind of like cars, right? When you buy them, you take it out of the box and you instantly lose, with the exception of a few brands, but you instantly lose like 30 to 40% of the value.
Right.
But if you wear it and you don't destroy it, you usually can sell it for about the same amount.
Yeah.
So I'm a lot into watches, and you can basically run, once you've made the initial, let's say, sunk cost, but you can basically run your passion with, and your annual cost is going to be the shipping. That's usually what you lose, right?
Yeah, and you can like trade in and out of them. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not such an expensive thing. Of course, you have some immobilized capital that sits there in something that's completely unproductive. How does your?
If I may, the other thing that kind of deterred me from that angle, which is also kind of how I thought about it, was the maintenance. So I actually do have an old Omega Seamaster from like the 60s, but I haven't quite reached the point where I'd be comfortable doing my own maintenance on such a watch. Mm-hmm. And so if you take it in, you're paying something like $200 to get it like cleaned up and looped again and so on. So right now with my various cheap ones, it's still like you have 6 watches just sitting there and replacing batteries on them constantly. So there's also some carrying cost in doing that, unless you can trade them before you need, re-maintenance. So I suppose if you can flip really fast, I don't know if that's
but let's say it can be cheaper than people can think.
Right.
How does pivoting from watches to time? How does your, let's say, being not needing to work and kind of like blurring the distinction between work and play, which is, I understand the situation where you're at, has it changed your perception of time in some sort of way?
Oh, no, I think it's because my wife still works. So mainly I differentiate between like weekend and weekday, but not particularly which weekday it is, but I can definitely tell whether it's weekday or weekend. And I can also approximately tell which time of the day it is. So that's about it.
Since you're wearing a watch.
That too, yeah, but it's not, I mean, I've seen these kind of joke watches where there's like, it spins the other way around. It doesn't show what hour it is or something, but I don't think it's quite at that point. I mean, I also like to watch what the market does over a day. So I definitely know when the stock market opens and when it closes again, that kind of stuff.
How much time are you spending looking at your investments?
Way too much. A lot of unnecessary time. Let's put it that way. It's not really necessary, but I kind of enjoy it for the same reason that other people might enjoy looking at the news. I just sort of understand the news through what the market does, rather than maybe the other way around. I think that's all often misunderstood. Like now, Jacob spends like hundreds of hours like annually just to manage his investments. So and therefore I should go to index funds. Therefore I cannot retire. But it's really mostly because I find it interesting. I think.
Say compared to, I know you don't like to talk too much about this kind of stuff, so just feel free to wave the question off. But compared to a basic index, okay, how's your tilt today? How much do your investments differ from an index?
I have two index funds, and I have about, let's say, 40 different positions in individual stocks.
So, sorry, I phrased the question wrong.
Okay.
So, I'd say give you an example. I do both. I do both index and stocks, right? And my single stocks compared to an index would be less tech heavy, more focused on companies that actually make money and with low levels of debt. Let's say, do you have a strategy, or you just like to spend time?
Oh no, I mean, so in that sense, all my indexing is done in bonds, because bond trading tends to be quite illiquid and inexpensive, whereas stocks, at least in the US, is practically zero commission. I mean, you pay in spreads and slippage and all that kind of stuff, but so I pick all my own stocks because it allows me to essentially tailor my portfolio to what I think the proper market orientation should be in that regard. If bonds traded like stocks, I might be going the same way there, but it's just easier to just think. I mean, I just think of it as like some point on the yield curve. That's probably like too advanced, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
I have just one last question that I need to ask you. In your book, okay, there's one part that I don't know why struck a chord with all of the Italians. So in the same way that Americans kind of were focusing on the lentil soup thing, all the Italians were flabbergasted by your description of the alternative way of doing laundry by driving a car down a bumpy road. So,
that was a joke.
Okay, exactly. That's my point. I was like, that must be a joke. Okay, so can we clarify? You were not driving cars down bumpy roads.
No, that does come out a lot. I think I saw it somewhere else, and I thought, wow, that's a clever, out of the box way of thinking about it. Like you fill up buckets, right? That are already in your car. That's where you keep your laundry. And then you just could put water in them, and then they'll get agitated a bit, and then when you come home, you bring them out. I mean, it's in a sense more clever than washing them by hand. It's a solution, right? I mean, but it's not something I've done. No, I mean, we have on occasion washed clothes in the bathtub, but right now we have your standard US top loader washing machine. We don't have a dryer though, and no intention of getting one. But yeah, there are like certain things I wish I had never mentioned, like the bucket system and the lentil soup. I mean, I kind of realized over the years that presentation matters, because if people need an excuse to dismiss some general concept, that they'll usually pick something weird and say I could never do that, and this is just totally weird, and therefore that kills the entire concept, right? That's just how people work.
I've said this multiple times. I think your book and let's say your old self is sneaky super underrated forms of humor. I actually laughed a lot by reading your
Yeah.
book, and I've read it a few times. And so I think sometimes people take things too seriously. That's just about the
Yeah, I
thing,
mean,
right?
I think actually you're right. It could be some kind of humor thing. I mean, I might actually be funny when it comes down to it. Right. Okay. Okay, that fell flat. I'll work on that. But I think like in terms of like cultural differences, like Danish humor tends to be similar to British humor in that it leans in this sort of surreal and deadpan uh, direction.
That's why I loved it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jacob, we can edit this out. I don't know. It just came up. I don't know if you want to talk about this. I think some time ago you mentioned that you were working on a book.
Oh yeah.
Is it something that you're still working on? You want to talk about it, or prefer just not to just to avoid?
It's sort of like thinking in progress still. Should it be a book? Should it be some other format? Do people read books anymore? I don't know. So I definitely working on some kind of mission. It's just a question of which form it'll take. I think the original idea was something like I need to write 3 books in my life, sort of like the beginning, the middle, and the end. And that was supposed to be like the middle book. But it's tons of notes now. And one thing I realized with the project is that it's best not to start with the book before you do the research. It's better to do the research first. Let me rephrase that. It's kind of like approaching it like you would do a research project or a PhD thesis. You build some code, you do a lot of research, you take notes, you do talks, you write papers, and then towards the end you sort of you put everything together and then pretend that's what you intended all along. That's how that usually goes. Whereas with this project, it was kind of started from the back end of things. Let's first try to structure and write out how it's supposed to be, and then fill in all the blanks. But then I had to relearn the hard way again that this is not really how original research works. So restarted, sort of. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great non-answer, I think.
It gives us a window into what's happening. Okay, so
Yeah.
we usually end our podcasts, and actually my co-hosts were super disappointed that they couldn't participate. But it's impossible. I live in Hong Kong, you live in Chicago, and they're in Italy and Finland, so it's kind of hard. Try and look up the time zones. It's
the time zones really killer.
Yeah, the 3 were just impossible.
Yeah.
We usually end the podcast with a recommendation. It could be a book, a movie, a music album, or anything. Now, I didn't brief you about this, so we can totally skip it. If you prefer, if you have something interesting that comes to mind that you're reading or that you're watching that you think is worth it. It doesn't need to be a personal finance kind of thing or related to money in some sort of way. It could be anything.
Yeah, if it could be anything, I don't know. It kind of depends on what kind of interesting you're looking for, right?
It's a question to you, so you feel free to answer however you want.
Yeah, but I usually sort of recommend things based on context and the audience.
Okay.
That's my problem. I mean, I did sort of come up with a bunch of things that maybe people haven't read. So that was mostly in the fiction department.
Go.
One book I so yeah. Speaking of humor, I recently, thanks to Twitter, discovered a British author called Magnus Mills. Yeah, like that. And his first book was called The Restraint of Beasts, which is about this fencing company that kills their clients. Sort of very deadpan. So maybe that's not very fire related, but it kind of shows this kind of whole sort of very laid back working attitude towards things. They put up a fence and then the customer comes up behind and they accidentally whack him on the head and it's like, is he dead? Yeah, he's dead. Okay, let's bury him. And then they just move on to the next job. There's a lot of violence in this podcast. I don't know if it's because it's late in the evening.
I don't know. Maybe it's the hockey and water polo.
Right, yeah.
Kind of violent sport.
Yeah. But that's just like a recent book. I mean, if you want sort of more of a favorite book, I think the Three-Body Problem is probably the best fiction book I've read in years. That's a series.
What's the author?
Three-Body Problem, yeah. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's a Chinese guy. Begins with a C. I'll look it up.
I'll figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it talk about?
Basically about aliens, space aliens. So I think one of the bigger things that came out, the bigger ideas in it describes basically the time from now to the end of the universe, like literally the heat death or collapse of the universe. And it's one of those giant epic things. But the great idea, as far as I'm concerned, was called like the dark forest theory of the universe. It's kind of meant to solve the Fermi paradox. I don't know if that's like well familiar with it for everybody. It's like the idea of like if the universe is supposedly teeming with life as per the Drake equation, you can calculate like how many stars are there, how many stars has a viable planet, what's the likelihood of life originating on that planet, what's the likelihood of them developing a technological civilization and transmitting and contacting others. And so if you calculate all these probabilities, the probability of there being someone who would have contacted us is generally more than one, so why haven't they? And the dark forest theory was that, well, since the universe is essentially finite, the resources are limited. So maybe we should not announce our presence. Maybe we're more like rabbits in a universe of like wolves, and so we should be like keeping like quiet. We should not be sending radio and TV signals everywhere, announcing our presence to the world. Does that make sense?
Interesting, yes.
Yeah, so that's essentially the driving idea of the whole thing, that there's another civilization like 10 light years away or whatever, and they actually detect the signal, and then plays out over the next, I think, 200 or 300 years where they are coming to Earth to eradicate it, because they are like, or eradicate us rather, because they need the resources and they are much more technologically advanced than humans, because they understand higher levels of physics. And out there, the aliens of even more sort of like at an even higher stage. It's like gunpowder meets the natives, but on an entirely different level. So yeah, I mean, and goes on for thousands of pages. It's probably pretty impossible to turn into a movie, but it was pretty big a couple of years ago. So yeah. Anyway,
how many books do you read a year?
It varies, but I'd say probably about 50-ish.
And of those, how many are fiction and how many are non-fiction?
Oh, probably 90% are non-fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, fiction is very sort of idiosyncratic. I have like fiction phases, but mostly it's non-fiction. I try to steer towards the textbook thing as much as possible, because I find that a lot of the non-fiction is more of the some journalist has like one idea and then they travel around and talk to various experts, and at the end you have some kind of very imperfect view of the field, as opposed to if you just picked up a textbook and learned about it in that way.
So you're still in the, learning phase everywhere. That's kind of like the
yeah. I think Yeah, I think at this point in my life, I must be sort of closing in on like 3,000 books or something. I don't know, read. I've sort of been going around puzzling with the idea of reading the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's probably better if I announce that after I had actually read it, if I ever do it. But it turns out it's actually a thing. It's like
Really?
people have done this, and they kind of do it for fun or for achievement.
It's like the gamification of
Yeah, it's a sort of like the marathon of reading, I guess. So if you can say you run a marathon, you can say, well, I read that. It's something like 80, is it 40 million words or something? It's up there. It's the problem is that they don't publish a paper version of it anymore. So I think the newest version is from 2005, and that sort of puts. I would really like to read it on paper, because if I read things online, I don't tend to remember as well. Whereas I can typically sort of my brain can sort of like figure out where in a given book I read something. If it's on the left side of the page at the top, sort of like at page 200-ish something. But if it's on a screen, I have like it doesn't arrange itself as well. But reading in an encyclopedia that is already 16 years old sounds a little. I mean, it doesn't sound very intelligent. So I don't know.
It's fun what you mentioned. I have this exact same thing about paper that you do. I tend to read like stuff that's not very deep on a Kindle or something.
Yeah.
Right? But what I consider good is usually I like to own it on paper. I guess it's our age,
I don't know.
I'm 40 and it's the same. So I did something very financially responsible. I bought your book both in the Kindle version and then the paper version, which is something completely against the principle of the same book, but I kind of had to own it. So listen, Jacob, thank you so much for your time. Do you have anything else that you want to add, or do you think we covered our topics? We can circle back and do this again. I think you're a fabulous interview. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think we're good. I mean, it's
okay.
What I had. I mean,
very well. So thanks a lot for being with us. It's been great. People can find you, I guess, on the forum, which is the best way to if people want to interact and see what you're doing. Is there anything else that you would suggest? I see that you've been more active on Twitter, right?
Yeah. I'm trying out Twitter again after a 10-year break.
But mostly on the forum, so the Early Retirement Extreme forum. Thanks so much, Jacob, for being with us, and good night.
Yeah, good night.